Hi, my name's Jim Cumero. I've been cutting glass for about 8 years now. I'm going to walk you through the methods that I use for cutting glass, different thicknesses. A big key to cutting glass is going to be using a glass cutter, obviously. You can pick these up at hardware stores or probably on Amazon. And then the actual cutting aspect of it, you're going to need even pressure. You obviously don't want to break the glass, you don't want to chip the glass, and that's what this cutter's going to do. You're also going to need some, what we got here, this little cutting fluid, cutting oil.
And that could be like mineral spirits too, right?
Mineral spirits, yep. So what you're going to want to do, right now we have this glass, 3.2 millimeter. This is going to be pretty close to the standard size for windows, that kind of stuff. We have some thinner glass. This is 1.1 millimeter. And we have some 10 millimeter glass. That's pretty heavy duty.
Cool.
So,
And what's the surface that you're cutting on right now?
Oh, so you're gonna want to cut on a soft surface, like this is like a carpet material on wood. Something that's gonna give a little bit. You probably don't want to cut on like a really hard surface. But another thing is like before you start, you're gonna want to kind of clean off whatever table you're gonna work on. Just so if there's any glass chips or any rocks or whatever's going to be on your table, so you don't scratch up the glass. Okay. So you can use, this is a square, use a T-square. It doesn't have to be wood, it can be metal, but something that you don't want to move it too much onto the glass. Obviously, you don't want to scratch up the piece of glass that you are attempting to cut. Tape measure. So when you're going to measure out a piece of glass, you're going to want to factor in the wheel. So, right, to make the score on the glass, it obviously is a small little, I think, carbine.
Yep.
Carbine wheel, but there's about 2 millimeters in between the wheel and the edge of the cutter that's going to roll along your square. So you want to factor in about 2 millimeters smaller than what you're going to end up cutting. So, little display here. So when you eventually, you're going to find your mark, whatever you're trying to cut, and you're going to make sure you got a well lubricated wheel. Start at the top, and in one motion, one smooth motion, you're going to drag it from the top to the end. If you're not fully at the top of your piece, the glass might kind of curve off and end with just a not fully straight piece of glass. So I'm going to do one right here.
And that sound is really important because that sound means that you got a nice clean score. And then if you look, it's pretty even cut all the way across the top.
Yeah. So if you're cutting a lot of glass, eventually the sound is what will tell you before you even break it out whether or not it's going to break out how you want it. So for thinner kinds of glass, you can break it out by hand. It gets a lot more difficult the thicker you go. But what I like to do is kind of make little rams out of my finger and pinch the glass, hold on tight, and in one motion kind of come up and out. So we're gonna try that.
And those are Kevlar cutting gloves, so they give you some cut resistance. And then you either get gloves that have like a leather or a rubberized palm, and that gives you some puncture resistance as well.
Yeah, the rubber ones are a little better for gripping, but these are a little more comfortable. So
right?
yeah, we can do another one real
Want
quick.
to show us
here,
again?
too.
Yeah.
Show you the other way of breaking out. So another way, we use, this is just a little small segment of copper wire. And what you can do is put this just underneath the score. It's about a 1/2 inch in. And then apply some pressure to both sides. Comes out clean.
Yeah, so once you get it to break, then that should run along the length of the score, right?
Yeah.
All you're trying to do is pop it in that one area.
One of the problems you might run into is if you make the score, or let me back up 1 second. So when you make the score, you're actually going to be little flakes of glass are going to kind of spring up, and what happens sometimes is they kind of get caught in the wheel. So you'll really notice it if it's not well lubricated. Put a score down, you can hear it slide, where the wheel's no longer spinning, and it's just dragged across.
Okay.
And that'll make your line have a hole in it, or there'll be an empty mark in your score, where then the glass is gonna just follow the path of least resistance, and likely it will not be in your line, and it will be mushroom out.
Okay. Can you give me an example of what a bad cut looks like? You know, if you run it across
yeah.
a few times, or if you do it really too hard or something?
So here would be an example of not starting at the absolute top. And then,
See all those little flakes that are popping out? That means you're too hard a pressure, and you didn't start it at the end.
well,
Still got it to cut pretty good.
Yeah, that
You're
one
pretty
actually
good at this, though, Jim.
worked out. But let's do a little half circle here and see how that works out. Okay, so maybe. Oh, there we go.
Got it mostly to run. Now, if you do break one off like that, it's going to be hard to get it to restart and get a clean cut. Most times you're going to have a little nib on the end or something like that right at the joint.
Yeah. So let's do one where I just real hard pressure. So that's what I don't like to hear. But I bet I'll still cut. But another problem is if you put a lot of pressure, you're gonna see little kind of like teeth, kind of little sawtooth along that edge.
Really, you want that score to only propagate about 10% of the depth of the glass. So if it's 3 millimeter, you only want a score to be 0.3 millimeter, you know, really, really thin.
Okay, so now we got a piece of 10 millimeter glass, which I will attempt to cut. So with heavier glass, you might have to change up the cutter that you use. All these glass cutters are marked with a number, like 114, 124, 134, which corresponds to the, I believe it's the angle.
Yep, it's the angle of the cutting wheel.
Cutting wheel. So for the thicker glass, I'm gonna find a 148. And then once again, we want to start off with a well lubricated cutting wheel. So make a score.
Now you're having to push down a little bit harder with the heavier glass, right? The thicker
Yeah.
glass?
Yeah, because the score is everything. So with here, it's just from experience, you know that you're going to need to give it a little more pressure.
Another mistake I think people make is they put way too much cutting oil on. You can see there's a little bit of cutting oil on both sides of the score,
Yeah.
but it's not, you know, excessive. I mean, I've seen it where it's a 1/4 inch wide and there's just tons of like little chips in there.
Even this might be a little much. But, so, I don't think I'm going to have the hand strength to pop that off like I would a 3 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter. So here is a time where we're really going to need a piece of copper wire. And then just applying force kind of to the ends here. very similar if you're cutting tile or have any experience with that. But
And then could you do another one and show us how you start the score from popping it on the bottom? Have you done that before?
oh, like yeah,
The big metal pole or whatever they are?
you're talking like make the score, flip it, and knock it along the back.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go right in the middle. Actually, we're inside this, so I don't embarrass myself. Alright, so another way to break it out would be taking the cut side, flipping it, and then we're using most of these glass cutters will come with like a ball end on one side. I'm not sure if that's the reason why, this is the reason why, but we'll take it and kind of knock it all the way down.
And that'll help that crack propagate just a tiny bit.
Yeah. Just going around the end, pushing down. All right. A couple other methods of breaking your score out would be making a score, and then using these I call them Pittsburgh pliers. So one side is concave, and one side's got a little convex end. And so what that would do is pressure would be applied on the bottom and the center, and then on the top would be, about an inch away.
It's basically doing the same thing you just did with your fingers and your knuckles, just kind of prying that open to open up the score on the top.
Yep, so we'll do a little demo of that.
Nice.
There we go.
And yeah, it's hard to see here, but sometimes you get a little bit of a chunk of that bottom corner because it doesn't cut quite as cleanly using that method.
Yeah, and this is some pretty thick glass, too. Alright, and then one more method we got would be just using arm strength. So you pull the glass over to the edge of the table, hold on, pliant force on one end, nice grip, popping it off.
And that's something a lot of times we'll do with larger pieces where you're using almost gravity to kind of pop that edge.
Not the cleanest method. Ideally, you would use your hand, or I think using a wire kind of gives the best result, but sometimes you gotta do it.
And then the other thing is, on larger pieces like this, general rule of thumb is anything that's thinner than 3 mil, you might be able to get like a 1 inch strip out of. And if you get up to like 3 mil to 6 mil, so maybe up to 1/4 inch, you might be able to get 1.5 inch, 2 inch strip. But when you get up to like 10 to 12 mil, where you're only or 3/8 to 1/2 inch thick glass, about the thinnest strip of glass that you can run is about 4 inches. It starts getting more and more difficult to cut small pieces the thicker the glass goes. All right, so now this is 1 millimeter thick glass. So this would be like the glass that you got on your cell phone or something like that. Super, super thin.
Very thin, very flexible, a little freaky. So when we're cutting thinner glass, we use kind of a special cutter. So this cutter was made in Japan, and it has a small oil reserve, and it has a spring mechanism in there. So as you apply force, triggers that spring, and then allows a very slow drip of oil to make it down to the cutting head. So on thin glass, it's a little more tricky to cut because it breaks out very easily. The surface that you cut it on is going to start to become more important. This is 1 millimeter, so we should be able to cut it on this carpeted material. But the thinner you go, the more likelihood the pressure of starting your cut is going to be enough to start to break. but I think we should be good here.
So when you go to like 0.5 millimeter or 0.3 millimeter, you got to cut it on like a hardwood or a plastic table or something like that, right?
Something that's not going to give, because any carpet material, you're going to have a little give, and this thin of glass.
Yeah, this is like a 1/2 inch thick felt table. So a lot of times if you are just doing this at your house or in your shop, you can just lay literally a piece of felt down from like Hobby Lobby, lay it on a hard table, and you can use that to cut.
Yeah, you can use rubber too. Rubber works.
That's right, rubber.
Doesn't slip very much. So we're going to try, I'm going to press it a couple times, start the oil to flow. Apply pressure.
And that sound, it was a good score, but it's a really lot lighter sound than the other sound. And you can see the line better here because of that milky coverage. That's actually a coating that's put on top of the glass to keep it from getting stained.
Just like that. Do another one here. And if when you're cutting, I like to use, it's almost like holding a pencil, but I like to rest the cutter between my index and middle finger. Kind of hold it like, hold it tight, but you really don't want to be pushing down too hard. You want to just get right to the edge, and then a nice, straight, even pull. The more you are uneven with in your cut, the more likely it is it's going to wobble a little bit. And also, it's not, if the wheel isn't directly on top, you might be not catching the end of the wheel, you might be catching a little bit of like the side of the wheel. So just best practice, directly on top, pull down, smooth, steady motion. Try this one. Woohoo!
Cool. And then can you cut that once and then purposely let off all the pressure and then put it the rest of the way down, just so you can see what happens if you don't get even pressure? Because it's not going to want to follow us. If there's not a score there, it won't follow it, and it'll start to flare off. So if you're trying to break the glass and you're getting where it won't follow that cut, you're probably not having an even score. It could be because of the pressure. It could be because, like Jim said, you're moving from side to side.
Okay.
So right there you can see.
You can see somewhere in here there was not even pressure, and then it took a turn.
So you had a good score down where you were, where it broke out. In the middle, you didn't have a score at all, and then on this side, it had a score. But once you get to where there's no score, it's just going to run wherever the glass wants to break.
Yeah.
Awesome. Jim, thanks again for all your expertise and help. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Wear gloves too. Most important factor.
Thanks, Jim.